Great. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to give a couple minutes as folks come online and then we'll get started. Really looking forward to it. Great. Seeing people come in. So I'll say hello and welcome to today's webinar. I imagine folks will continue to join us over the next few minutes, but I'll just get us started with introductions and a little bit of housekeeping. My name is Valerie Pinkerton. I'm the TNFD and Transition Plan Lead at the Green Finance Institute, where I head up our market engagement in the UK for the TNFD. Today's webinar is hosted by the Green Finance Institute and the TNFD UK Consultation Group, and it's all about uncovering UK action on TNFD. So we'll hear from 3 companies in the UK across different sectors that have all adopted the TNFD recommendations. And we hope it will help break down some of the key motivations for getting started with TNFD recommendations, what first steps have been, and how this is helping to inform action across the organization. I know I'm really keen to jump into the discussion, but just a few points of housekeeping. You may wish to put Zoom in speaker view for the best viewing experience. A note that today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on the GFI website very shortly. And given the number of participants we expect today, we have disabled microphones and we encourage everyone to submit questions through the Q&A function on the screen. You'll also be able to see questions submitted by others, and there's an upvote button, so you can indicate if you'd also like that question to be answered, and that will help us prioritize questions for the discussion at the end. So with all of that, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speakers. We're really fortunate to be joined by Nick Gabriel, who is the Senior Sustainability Manager at Heathrow, Charlotte Keeney, who is the ESG Finance and Reporting Manager at Severn Trust, and PK Kyra Creswell, who is Director of Strategy and Corporate Affairs for Forestry England. So thank you so much all again for joining us. And maybe, Nick, can you kick us off by explaining why Heathrow decided to start reporting in line with TNFD?
Yes, no worries. Thank you, Valerie. Good morning, everybody. We started, I think it goes back to the solid foundation that Heathrow already had with respect to biodiversity and nature. We have connecting people and planet, which is our sustainability strategy for the business, and an objective that focuses on nature. So we'd had that in the business for many years. And building on that, we had already been doing work with TCFD, and so we were very much familiar with that reporting framework. And TNFD was like the logical next extension, very much aligned with that connecting people and planet ambition around progressing towards a nature positive airport. And we were also mindful that it would potentially become a regulatory requirement in time, as TCFD has become. It's worth mentioning as well that at Heathrow we have quite significant land holdings that we manage for biodiversity, 170 hectares. And so again, that's very much, part of our culture around sustainability, and TNFD sort of that next sort of logical step for us. We had some interesting insights come from some ESG sort of investor needs that was undertaken, and that very much highlighted nature as the key emerging trend that we were to position for. So getting that investor confidence, and I think it's probably worth saying that with the setup of the business, we had our ESG committee, and I remember taking TNFD to that committee as a recommendation, and it was very much, welcome and embraced quite early on, and really because of those points I just mentioned about it being sort of the next logical step for our business, but the sort of regulatory angle as well.
Great. Those are great insights. PK, am I right in thinking that there's a bit of overlap for the case for TNFD adoption, sort of regarding communication to key stakeholders for Forestry England?
Absolutely. It's been a really important part of our articulation of the true value of what it is we're doing as a part of stewarding largest landholding in the country, in the nation's forests, as Forestry England. So it's really helped us show how what we generate goes into that stewardship and the benefits that sort of provides, really.
Amazing. Charlotte, now coming to you, were the reasons for Severn disclosing in line with TNFD similar, or are there key differences in how you thought about it as a water utility?
Yeah, I think both probably. So as a water utility in England, nature's kind of part of what we've always done. So a bit like Nick was saying, we've always had kind of senior level buy-in. We've always been quite engaged with improving biodiversity, working with nature in our surroundings, because it's part and parcel of how we operate. I think for us, we had sort of three main reasons for adopting TNFD, and particularly early. One of those was our investors. Like, we're a PLC, our investors are particularly keen to understand what we're doing, and they kind of have a drive for, understanding that their investment is investing in nature. We also have investors who are already, really on board with everything we're already doing and kind of wanted us to demonstrate that to them. So it sort of helps with reporting. So kind of from that perspective, I think from us, a little bit like Nick said, it's about compliance as well and embedding processes early. So using a framework like TNFD gives us a structure to go at for the business internally, to set people in motion, to understand exactly what we need to be doing, understand responsibilities, and kind of also the third reason, to expose things that we could be doing better. So looking at somebody else's standard of what good looks like means that we have this ability to identify the things that we thought we were doing to a really high standard, and they probably are in the UK, but equally looking at somebody else's objective view gives us that extra level to work to. So yeah, it's been like pretty eye-opening for the people involved.
Fantastic. No, and that's, there are about 500 TNFD aligned reports in market now, and we think, exactly to your point, it's such a useful way just to share learnings and accelerate uptake of best practices. That's fantastic. And we see a lot of others in the UK market building nature strategies and disclosures following on experience on climate. Charlotte, can you tell us a little bit about what your practical first steps looked like for getting started on TNFD?
Yeah, sure. So as you introduced me, I'm the ESG Finance and Reporting Manager. So I work in kind of a central ESG reporting team. So my main focus is making sure that we report everything that we already do as a business. But we do have quite a lot of specialists across the business, and people who work in, various areas, biodiversity, nature, water, things like that. So one of our biggest challenges was kind of bringing people together. Something that we did for TCFD was set up a program board, have a central team who were going to kind of project manage the disclosure and the reporting. So we did a similar thing for TNFD, went around the business identifying key people. And I do think that's like one of the biggest steps, is kind of knowing who your experts are, not expecting to be able to do it all yourself. And I'm definitely not an expert in anything I write, really. So it's pretty good to know who you need to get on board and build that network across the organisation. I think we're quite lucky that we do have a team like mine that can centrally coordinate. I do appreciate sometimes it's just a man on his own. And I'm very lucky to have a team of 3 who work for me to help with that. We also have senior leadership brought in. So whilst it came from the CEO that we were going to do TNFD early, we did need to do some work to get other senior leaders brought in if we were going to lean on their teams to use their time. So I think you kind of have to go at it from kind of 2 steps. One is get your experts to kind of tell you what they know and get their engagement, but also speak to their leaders, because you're going to need their time in writing, drafting, investigating, interrogating. Even just explaining it to me took them a little bit of time. And I think also for me, it's kind of working out what the gaps were, like I talked about earlier. Use the LEAP assessment, which I think is a really good tool to establish what you're already doing, and don't put the pressure on yourself as a business to disclose really early. For us, it was all about getting a really intricate, detailed LEAP assessment done, and then identifying what that meant for our external kind of stakeholders, people like investors that wanted us to have something written down. So we definitely focused on it from that perspective, which the TNFD recommends, but equally kind of have to have all that stuff in place to get started. So there's a number of challenges, but I think for me the main points were kind of making sure that you've got people internally and have your priorities.
Absolutely, and leaving time for that mainstreaming piece and kind of drawing out where you may already have expertise in the organization.
Yeah.
So we'll come back, so I absolutely want to pick up to your point on the LEAP process and how that's informed action. But before that, Nick, can I come to you to talk a little bit about what your first steps looked like?
Yes, no worries. I think we started using the LEAP process, and actually that was used to inform our strategy for nature, which is our nature positive plan. So we did a gap analysis, which was very much a technical exercise working with consultants, and that involved a series of workshops across the entire organization, working with colleagues from engineering, finance, procurement, and then obviously myself in sustainability. And I suppose when we did that assessment, we started by looking at the airport site itself. You know, what are our direct impacts and dependencies on nature through our operations? But we sort of broadened that out to include the biodiversity sites that I mentioned before that have that positive impact, but also play a crucial role in the operations of our airport as well. And I think an important thing for us to do in that process was the LEAP approach didn't necessarily tell us stuff that we didn't know about before in terms of some of our impacts, but it just kind of gave us that holistic kind of view of nature in the round, looking at your impacts dependencies, but also recognizing some of the controls that we've already got in place and used to manage those impacts. We also did a high-level assessment of the value chain using what TNFD's recommended approach, Encore. So that was identifying the sectors and the locations, just to get an initial kind of understanding of the impacts and dependencies that we have through the value chain. And then obviously I mentioned that we included finance in some of those workshops, but I think this is probably a key takeaway for myself and probably others on the call. But I wish that I had engaged with finance a lot more from the start. And we're very much sort of working hand in hand in sort of finalizing our disclosure at the moment, because I mean, at the end of the day, whilst there's a technical assessment that needs to be done, a lot of it, you know, this is a financial disclosure at the end of the day, and we need to understand what that means in the risks and the opportunities means from a financial perspective. And then finally, the governance. You know, we touched on TCFD earlier on. That because we'd gone through the process with TCFD, we had sort of robust governance around all that, and so it was fairly straightforward to get TNFD kind of built into that. Although we are still sort of working out a few bits and pieces to do with that. But I suppose the message is, if you've done TCFD, you're probably in a good place on some of this work already.
Absolutely, it's a perfect place to start. And PK, actually coming to you, I'd love to hear about your starting points. Are there overlaps with Nick or Charlotte in considering the land management elements of your business particularly?
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. So we started our journey really with natural capital accounting. And so because we had really taken on that challenge, that meant that actually this felt like a really natural progression. And what we're finding is that TCFD alongside natural capital accounting gives us a really lovely sort of set. I think a big push for us, and where I can absolutely see some of the overlaps were, so we'd already approached in that technical, we used the LEAP framework to really sort of look at what the gaps were, to look at what else we needed to do on top of that natural capital accounting approach. But I think what was helpful from the start is, so I'm director of strategy, governance, reporting, performance. You know, it's 250,000 hectares. It's a big undertaking, and so actually, what we needed to do was to be really smart about it and thinking about what were the existing data sets. But because we sort of had that corporate sort of coherent bit from the start, it meant that we were able to sort of really think about it in terms of governance. We wanted to close that gap between the financial expression of what we're doing and that broader values bit, and to try and get those to speak to each other. And we are closer than ever, and what we're seeing is much richer conversations then in management decisions, in future sort of funding decisions, in thinking about risk. All of this sort of comes it's starting to come into it in a much more natural way. It starts a bit awkward, but actually you can see that it's getting called on more and more easily. So really helpful.
Absolutely. And, the Capitals Coalition is a key knowledge partner for TNFD. So those frameworks share so much DNA. So it's great to hear that in your experience, TNFD was sort of a natural step building upon that NCA work. Nick, there are so many elements to Heathrow's work on nature that you flagged. So the land management plans, how it extends to value chains, and that connection to your climate work that was already underway. How has the work you've done to date informed action across the business?
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. Yeah, like I say, it's we had used the TNFD LEAP approach to inform our nature positive plan, which was launched in December of last year, and that I think the TNFD LEAP sort of framework gives a really useful methodology for kind of helping to define nature and an organization's interactions with nature and dependencies on nature. And so a lot of the impacts that came out through that assessment were not necessarily new to the business. We knew about a lot of that already, but if anything, it helped to kind of bring it all together and sort of pull it together in a holistic strategy for us to work with colleagues across the entire business on, which is what we're doing at the moment. I think it's been useful to use TNFD to help produce a strategy that is, it's up on our website and, it's discussed routinely through the organization. So it's done a lot to sort of move nature on the up the agenda within the organization, which is great, given that we already had pretty solid foundation in this space already. And I think in terms of the value chain, we've kind of used existing processes that we've already got in place. But again, just kind of it's early days, so we've got a lot more work to do in this space. But fortunately, we've our procurement team have a great approach to engaging, particularly our strategic suppliers on sustainability, and nature is one of those things that we do discuss with our supply chain. And sort of, I suppose some of the early work we've done is sort of to ratchet up our ambitions or expectations of those strategic suppliers with respect to nature. And TNFD is one of those things that we flag as, it would be great if you could come on this journey with us. Yeah, I think lastly, the other thing that's been important for us is, and it's certainly something that's come out of recent discussions as we sort of start to finalize our disclosure, which we'll be publishing in Q1 of next year, is how the risks and how the risks are aligned with our existing enterprise risk management frameworks, and how we, after we've done this assessment, how do we get those reflected in the right way, in a consistent way, noting that we've done TCFD as well, and that will have gone through a similar approach. So yeah, those are probably the key action points.
That's really exciting, isn't it? PK, turning to you, has implementing the LEAP approach and then the natural capital accounting led to similar conversations from within or outside the business? Or what kinds of actions have been informed by the work you've done to date? And maybe looking ahead, how do you anticipate using it in the future?
So, great question. So we've found it enormously helpful in areas of growth in our business, because it sort of really sets a tone and a framework for how we are operating in that way. So if I give you an example of, we've really grown our corporate partnerships area. It started off as a pilot, where really everyone is having to think really carefully about where income is coming from and how we're building sustainable models. And that's a really important area for us. And the market is challenging, so everyone out there will know that there is sort of less automatic, say, sponsorship and partnership happening. So those numbers of those are reducing substantially. But what we're finding is that businesses are much more discerning about who they want to partner with. So it means actually it's less partnerships, but more potential money within those more sort of discerning partnerships. And actually having TNFD journey well underway and the NCA work that we've been doing has been a really helpful sort of alignment, sort of signal to people that they don't just want the badge, they want to know that organizations are taking this seriously. But it's that first step to going, okay, the fact that you are even in this process means that actually you're in the standing, and we would like to talk to you further. And that's been helpful. Internally, it's really helpful as a stepping stone, as we are, it's 250,000 hectares, largest landholding. This is not a small operation. It's and thinking about our journey to net zero and the stepping stones, and this is all a really fantastic part of that process, and of taking that on. And wider opportunities, green finance, those kind of negotiations and opening up. Again, this is a really helpful part of that framing. So yeah, lots for us, lots of value there.
Fantastic. Those were great insights. Charlotte, I wonder if there's then actually a contrast for Severn Trent, in that nature and nature-based solutions support risk management for water companies' business models. How has the implementation of the LEAP approach and TNFD disclosures resulted in actions across the business, either from a risk management perspective or otherwise?
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're sort of 3 years into our journey, I suppose. So like I said at the start, it's really embedded in what we do already. So everybody we speak to, it's not new for them. It's almost like trying to explain a concept of external reporting rather than what should we do about nature. So I think like my answers might seem a little bit removed from what other businesses are having to deal with, but it's great, it's a great environment to work in because people really care. So I think for us, the biggest part of our kind of action implementation was sort of elevating strategic conversations. The fact that investors are interested means that we can have conversations with more senior people to say, this is why you should care about how it looks on the outside. Because we do a lot of hard work and we manage our impact on the environment every day. And we do a lot of work trying to, tell that story effectively so that people understand what we do and how we do it. I think for us, the practical implementations did come around to risk planning, like you talked about, Nick mentioned, like ERM and our systems. And I think for me, that's been one of the kind of more rewarding implementation things. I think sometimes I attend webinars like this and I want to get their practical implementation steps out of people. Yeah. And I think I'll be asking Nick some of the questions afterwards on the like supply chain stuff, because that's the step that we want to take in the future. So for us, the key kind of gaps that we identified when we did our gap analysis were things like having a nature positive approach and a transition plan that involves nature more explicitly. So that's something that we're working on in terms of what's the guidance, what do other people do, how, what does good look like, so that we can focus on that. And as I mentioned, like implementing actual action into our ERM system. So we already have a really embedded central system where people manage risk across the business. It's already a web of a network. So encouraging that network to embrace nature and understand nature risk on existing risk, but also on any risk they haven't thought of, has actually been like a pretty kind of active process. So we've got like lots of people brought in. We've built in new processes into the ERM system. We've created new, like check boxes in the process. So it's gone to a very granular level. And I think in some ways that's been a great learning curve, because it's kind of opened people's eyes to the more process-driven elements of what we needed to implement, whilst establishing something that we can use effectively for reporting. And I think just moving on from that, just our biggest challenges are in reporting. Like, it is another framework. It's another thing that's asking you to put more messages out there that might sound similar to other ones that you're already putting out there. So I think one of our biggest things that just happened coincidentally was we ran a non-financial reporting review in parallel with launching TNFD last year and the year before. And as a result of doing that, we simplified a lot of our reports. So we're not duplicating the same messages for different stakeholders. We've kind of got one single version of the truth, and that's aligned as much as possible to frameworks while still telling the story that we want to tell for our business. So I would recommend thinking about that as these frameworks evolve, that businesses feel particularly overwhelmed. It is good to look at what you're doing and try and streamline and simplify where possible. And it just means you're getting your message out there in a better way.
Absolutely. And I think that's a piece of advice or just a perspective that we hear from others, that these frameworks were developed sort of in close partnership. And so if you have CSRD obligations or you're already getting started, to Nick's point on TCFD, like there are so many opportunities for alignment and to try to look for that streamlining and not get sort of too daunted by taking on TNFD as a new obligation. Great. Well, thank you all so much for sharing these insights. I mean, it seems from all of you that TNFD has been a real vehicle to engage internally across multiple teams and a really useful tool to communicate actions to your external stakeholders, and whether that's customers, investors, or otherwise. So we're going to open the floor up for some audience questions. And I know we've got a couple that have come in. This is one maybe, Nick, to you. This looks like our most upvoted question. Were there any surprising dependencies on nature that you and your team identified?
Yeah, I think, like I say, most of them, the vast majority, were ones that we kind of already aware of. I think because of the nature of our business, we're under a lot of scrutiny, and we've got loads of different permits and licenses and whatnot that requires significant kind of monitoring and environmental monitoring and performance evaluation and so on. So I think for that reason there wasn't anything that really jumped out as a surprise. But I think one that was brought into focus a lot more as a result of TNFD, I think, was the issue around food. And actually, like when you look at Heathrow, we're like a large shopping center, really. We've got so many different food and beverage outlets, and we've got challenges around food waste as well. So I think the sort of consumption of food and that having been derived from nature, and then the issue of it forming part of our waste as well, has definitely shined a light on that. I think it gets complicated though, I think, and I appreciate a lot of people are probably experiencing the same complications, but to what extent, where do you draw the line around that? Because actually, we've got some big brands operating out of our airport, and it's actually a lot of that waste is not really our waste, and the consumption of that food is not strictly from our business, but we are to a degree benefiting from that. So we're trying to sort of understand to what extent do we tackle that. And I think what is clearly within our scope is any sort of food within our sort of staff catering, which is significant because obviously we've got staff catering in our headquarters, but then in all the terminals. And so we are definitely going to be starting off looking at that, and then we'll work into the broader airport.
Really interesting. PK, did you find that the natural capital accounting approach addressed the full LEAP approach? And if not, what did you feel you needed to do in addition?
I think what we found was that it was a really helpful addition. And we're still sort of piloting it and working out. And again, others have talked about, we don't want to be overwhelmed with reporting. We don't want to sort of make a mini industry out of it. We want it to feel really useful and have cut through. And so where we I think broadly thinking about it, the NCA has been incredibly helpful in thinking about those big picture ecosystem services, those benefits to people, but the TNFD helped us get really specific and really thoughtful about those gaps around things like pollution removal, resource use, replenishment. It also helped us think about sort of materiality assessments. It just started to get really, really specific, and so that's why they work really well together. So it's been.
And that's prompting for me, I think, a question for all three of you of what have you found has been the most valuable outcome for you from going through the TNFD process? PK, maybe I'll start with you and then go around.
With me, yes. So I think probably it's been really helpful to be an early adopter and be able to signal, to bring my fellow directors along with me on the journey, and to sort of say, look, we're in this space where we're really driving forwards. We don't need to be perfect here. We just need to start. So that's a really important thing, and helping being able to signal the ways, the really different ways in which we've been able to use this process to generate value and to indicate quality and commitment has been really helpful. So it just makes those other conversations that are also competing for resource, like net zero and green financing or whatever they are, it makes it just that much easier because we're already sort of tackling this challenging thing and cracking on with it.
Absolutely. Having that framework to hand when you're thinking about where there are synergies and also where there are trade-offs and you're making those challenging resource allocation decisions. Absolutely. Maybe Charlotte, I'll come to you next.
Sure. So I think it's sort of two elements probably linked to what PK was saying as well about being an early adopter. So working closely with the GFI as part of an industry group has been particularly helpful, kind of influencing how we build sector guidance that's relevant for the water sector, understanding upstream, downstream impacts, making the language used in all of the guidance really relevant so that, as we use it, it's consistent. And ultimately, this is about a framework that can be comparable across people in different sectors and similar sectors. And then hinged off the back of that, I think just being able to demonstrate how this can be done. So for us, we feel like it's in our blood, it's what we do already, and it's given us a structure in which to report that, both for comparability, consistency, like externally, but equally, we are aware that we work with a lot of organisations, whether they're suppliers, customers, retailers. Everybody uses our water, just only in our little area of the UK. But every type of business you can imagine, and individuals and small companies, and agricultural and manufacturing, and so we see it as really important that we act as kind of a conduit for that information. That this is how we manage nature. How do you manage nature? How can we work better together? Because ultimately it's not our nature, it's not your nature, it's the bit in the middle that we all need to rely on. So I think I liked what we were talking about earlier, like what Nick was saying about suppliers and the others operating in the airport and things, that it's a bit like scope 3 with carbon. It's the stuff you can have some influence over because you can have kind of a say in how this should be done. But ultimately, you're having to work in partnership with other organisations to find a way to solve a problem together. So I think for me, as a water business and as someone who just reporting, it's the thing that it would be great to get out of this. And I think we're already seeing some of that connection.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think identifying those opportunities for collaboration and just sort of being greater than the sum of the parts when you're tackling some of these shared challenges in the supply chain is a really great way forward. Nick, interested for you, what's been most valuable from the process?
Yeah, I think a lot of what PK and Charlotte have said is what I was thinking of saying. So I think the industry collaboration is very helpful. And in the early days, it was quite hard actually to find other sort of aviation sector organizations that were, on the road to TNFD, and I think that's changed quite a bit now, which is good. And I'm really happy that, and I like to think that obviously, early adopters have helped almost encourage that uptake, which I think which is actually a part of our strategy anyway, just to try and influence that change. And I think culturally, I was talking earlier on about. In fact, it comes back to discussions I was having with one of my colleagues in our carbon strategy team, and they were talking about one of the benefits of TCFD was that it sort of it heightened the importance of it, and sort of it sort of got other colleagues in the room working together on it, and I think TNFD's done very much the same thing. So that's been great in terms of just getting nature up the agenda and getting collaboration to happen across the business. And then lastly, I remember a number of years ago now, when nature was getting more and more sort of spoken about in the corporate world, you go to sort of roundtable events, and for the first sort of 15-20 minutes, people would be sitting there discussing, well, what does nature actually mean? And
the definition days.
And so So it's been great for TNFD to give it that a clearer definition because it is complicated. You know, when you look at all the different metrics, you know, the core metrics and the additional metrics that TNFD outlines. Yeah, I think, you know, to have a bit more definition around it and to make it a bit easier to understand has been really helpful. And that has very much been used to, like I said before, to inform our own strategy.
Amazing. And I'll make a quick reference for our audience that the TNFD website is a treasure trove of those materials if you're just getting started with some of those core concepts, even just to kind of build facility and knowledge in-house as part of what is a significant change management operation. But Nick, I wanted to double click a bit on the point you were making just around collaboration in the sector, if there have been sort of venues for that or approaches you've taken that you found especially useful for collaborating with peers.
Yeah, I think it's been a case of getting involved in our sort of industry associations. So ACI is quite obviously a large industry association in the aviation, well, the airport sector. And yeah, there's been some good collaboration on that. In terms of how that's kind of come about, I think it has been sort of, you know, comms and, you know, launching of new strategies and then, obviously each of these organizations has their own sustainability department or strategies or ambitions. And, you know, they're seeing what's happening in the sector. They're probably getting asked similar questions from lenders and investors and so on about nature. And so there's been that appetite, I think, to come together to talk about it anyway. But I think certainly going along to these events and presenting on your nature strategy or your biodiversity strategy or sharing your learnings from TNFD has been super helpful for me personally, because it's, you know, people have known who to speak to within the organization. So yeah, so and I have been very much been keen to speak to other companies in my sector about this, just to sort of learn from each other, because it is in the early days a complex process to get through, but it's easier done when you're working as a team.
Absolutely. Yeah, we found a lot of value in convening peer-to-peer cohorts to have that opportunity to sort of speak through challenges and stress test ideas in a bit of a safe pre-competitive space. Jumping back into the Q&A, I know we've got a question from a nature restoration provider currently developing their own TNFD report, asking what would you all as potential buyers or investors in nature recovery want to see in a supplier's TNFD report as evidence that might be included in your own? So that's a broad one, and maybe a sub question of that could be, are you anticipating sort of purchase of credits as part of actions that may be coming forward based on your TNFD work, or if that's not yet an area that you're exploring?
Well, we're more in the providing credits space.
That's right.
In the buy, so less relevant. But yeah, it's just part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I could probably answer it a little bit from the what do we expect in suppliers, in the sense of, as I said earlier, when Nick mentioned about working the value chain, we are keen to work with our value chain, supply chain, wider, dependencies in our business. So I think for me, that's why the framework is such a good starting point, because we're going to create consistency by following the framework. So I think for me, what I'd be looking for is kind of the information, like the basics, the skeleton of how you operate as a business and what you are driving at. So what have you identified that's true about how you operate, so that it's really clear as to why, like how we as one of your kind of later in value chain, earlier in value chain components, how it impacts us. And I think then leaning on to that is making that insight particularly useful. So rather than just, kind of talking about what you do as you already do, or providing data that you already provide, trying to create that insight that says, we've identified this as a challenge, this is what we're now going to do about it, or we have this investment program that's going to solve this, or this is what we're developing. So that then we, as a potential partner or someone who's impacted by that, has the ability to also turn around to you and say, actually we're doing this, we could work in collaboration, or this is now going to impact our ability to tell other suppliers or others in our network, this is an example of someone who's doing it well. Because we're doing quite a lot of that in our business in terms of kind of like place-based planning, thinking about, but in particular areas, it's going to be a particular impact on that environment. Like you can't plan for your entire region, it's going to be different in different areas. So I think I would make it really specific and really about like you, where you operate, and how it works. I can't really comment on like how, it's quite a vague question in the sense of, is that going to have an impact on us buying something? I don't think so, because we do our own kind of biodiversity development. But that doesn't mean there's not space for partnerships. So yeah, it depends on the activity. But I think for me, it's more about making your data and your information kind of tell like very specifically the story in individual places.
Absolutely. And I think that links back to the conversation we were having around how engaging with supply chain and opportunities for sectoral collaboration. So some of the insights we found from our engagement, for example, with the built environment, is they're hearing from their own suppliers that they'd like to see a bit more standardization, consistency in what's being asked of them. So this is perhaps in procurement contracts, but if as a sector there are opportunities for closer alignment on shared definition of metrics, and that can then be communicated on to suppliers, it just makes it a bit easier for everyone to speak the same language and make a more standardized request for data in some of those decisions. But I have another question from for PK. Says, I see citizens as our shareholders and ecosystem services as the dividends public sector generates for them. What narratives did you use to explain the relevance of TNFD to your public sector organization?
Great. I was going to answer that written if it wasn't called on. So that's
fab.
Thanks for asking. So I think for us, what was really clear was that it was really difficult to talk about the value. It's sort of, it's not that people didn't know that it was great to have visitors and the fact that we were helping sort of manage floodwater or anything, but actually it became really apparent by going through this process that we are able to then be really specific about what we are delivering. And your question is a really interesting one, Vicky, because actually what we have found is that we're able to lead the conversation, to influence it, because it wasn't being held in that way, because always the financial sort of accounting approach always sort of overtook what got measured, what got seen as valuable, what how targets were set, how success was measured. So actually to be able to do this has really helped balance out how we view success and how we deliver impact, and that's been enormously helpful.
Brilliant. Well, I've got a broader question. I think we've touched on this a little bit in each of your remarks, but helpful to dig in a little bit deeper. How easy have you found it to build off some existing frameworks or maybe license requirements, and how much new was needed as you were sort of going through this process?
I think for us, we started with natural capital accounts, as I said, and we did lots of what are the existing data sets that we already have. And again, because we sort of have stuck with it, it's been great to then build complexity as we've gone. So rather than trying to start with perfection, do lots of commissioning, lots of consultancy, extra, we started with what we had, and then that gave us the basis to spend a bit more, to think about other expertises and other data sets that we might want to then build. But I think that's critical to this, is not trying to start with perfect and just starting with what, because often with land management based businesses, other types of businesses, you have lots of data. It's how you're then, this is about how you are arranging it in that. And we had, I think they're on with us, we used FTech, were a great sort of consultancy to help us in developing that process, and it was enormously helpful to work in partnership.
Absolutely, and that resonates with guidance we give to partners when we speak to them of, please don't wait until you have all the data to get started. And I think that's been a pretty global reflection from early adopters that they're often a bit surprised by how much relevant data they're already collecting through other processes, and that gives them a good foundation to get started. I wonder if others wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, yeah, I was just going to say what you said, Valerie. I think the reality is, because of the size of our operation and the activities that we undertake at Heathrow, we have so many permits and there's so much sort of monitoring that happens and sampling equipment and so on. So we actually have some really great data, which is aligned to some of the sort of core metrics that TNFD advise. So I think from that point of view, it's that's been quite an easy kind of been easily build off that. I think in terms of the ISO standards, we also have a whole range of different ISO standards, including obviously the 14001 environmental management system standard. And I think it's probably too early at the moment. I think that we haven't at this stage looked at how we could build off that and integrate nature completely into that properly. But it would be a sort of a missed opportunity if we didn't do that. So I think that's certainly something we could look to explore as we get further on our journey.
Brilliant. And another area I was thinking about, kind of in connection to building up where you have existing regulation, maybe Charlotte, coming to you, were there outcomes from the LEAP approaches that you found resulted in new targets, or was that less of an area that was sort of new, given how much this was already kind of building on business as usual for the water sector?
Yeah, I think it was definitely we've applied quite a bit of interrogation to the metrics element, for example, because that is new. It's a big list of stuff that we should be measuring, could be measuring, and in order to demonstrate impact and understand what we can manage down or change or do differently. I think the majority, even through that interrogation process, the majority of the metrics that TNFD has come up with kind of outside of our sector, it's still there already in a lot of the data that we report, being a regulated business with such a dependency on the environment, with such an impact that we can make positively, negatively. Like we are that business that's right at the forefront of nature. So I think for us, it didn't come as a surprise that a huge amount of those things were already part of what we do. But equally, that doesn't make it any less kind of actionable, I suppose, that they're measurable and we report them. But what we were reporting them before was a measure of our progress or our performance, which we would take in certain teams as vital for, we're doing this initiative, we need to make this better, let's use that data that we report to Ofwat to see a progression. Whereas this centralizes that and it makes it more visible and visual in one place. We can make that part of our annual report, or we can put it in a data book for analysts to use, however we want to do it, but we can ultimately use that data in one place. And I think as a result of that, it gives us an opportunity to set targets that align with others that look like metrics like TCFD have, in the sense of we're trying to achieve something, how do we show progress? And whilst our regulator would have been looking for that as well, a lot of that is very time-bound, investment-bound. So I think it gives us kind of that data element of the investment and the opportunity that we already had. So some of the things that we were already going above and beyond on, things like our biodiversity targets, we tripled in a year when we had a 5-year target, things like that we were doing anyway, which is fantastic. This gives us other little ones to kind of go out and say, what if you put the same team behind this? Could you do that? I think it's kind of insight from the data has been the biggest thing.
Really interesting. And to your point, the water sector is in a bit of a unique regulatory situation in terms of the time horizons for investment decision making. What kinds of time horizons have you been able to pursue in terms of target setting through TNFD? Have there been opportunities to sort of look a bit further down the track to set longer term targets?
So I'll answer for us first, but I think for us, it's about looking at that kind of transition plan, nature positive language about what are we actually trying to achieve from a holistic perspective, because yes, we do already have individual targets. We have targets we set internally as well as the external ones the regulator sets. And like I say, we're going to use the insight from the data to kind of understand what's reasonable and practical and what we should be doing. But I think the expectation that we do something over a longer period will come when we have kind of more understanding and kind of reinterrogate the transition plan idea a little bit further and understand, like, if we want to be nature positive, what does that mean? How does it look? How do you transition towards it? What are others doing? What does transitioning mean? And really wrap our heads around that before we just do it, because I think it's important to take that kind of language quite seriously. I don't want it to get into the position where we've had with net zero and with carbon neutral and all the various terminologies around that can be seen as greenwashing, when actually it might have just been a genuine mistake that somebody adopted a terminology. And so I think we want to kind of make sure that we understand what we're committing to, and then that gives us a strategic horizons on which to kind of base that plan.
Absolutely. And this is a really exciting time to be thinking about all of those components of how do we articulate a commitment to a contribution to nature positive, which is challenging in of itself as a global target, with great work going on by the Nature Positive Initiative to clarify what that means for a corporate. And then on the transition plan side, new guidance freshly out from the TNFD, and an opportunity to build a lot on the thinking that's already gone underway for net zero transition plans. So I think a lot of organizations are in that headspace, trying to think about what's next. And maybe relatedly, one last question I'd be interested for everyone to reflect on is, how have you started or already integrated your nature and climate strategies, and maybe what has been surprising or challenging about that process? Maybe Nick, I'll start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah. So I mean, we've obviously climate and decarbonisation is a significant priority for the business. So we've had a net zero plan now for many years, and that's something that gets a lot of focus within the business on our sustainability plan. I think in terms of the interactions with the nature positive plan, the kind of obvious one which we're looking at the moment is sort of nature-based carbon removals. And it's kind of, I suppose, related to Ben's question earlier on. And I suppose what we'd be looking to do with that is ensure that any kind of nature-based carbon removal projects that we invest in or support are sort of leading in terms of their nature, sort of biodiversity benefits as well as the carbon benefits. So it's just making sure that we get the most out of those investments, which we are in a really good place on at the moment anyway. But that will be a significant focus. And I think the other angle is climate adaptation as well. I mean, one of the things that the TNFD LEAP approach highlighted in terms of a risk was what degraded ecosystems around our airport and in our catchment means from a climate adaptation perspective. Their ability to slow the flow of like floodwaters and manage floodwaters and so on. Obviously, if habitats are degraded, then that is compromised. And so, we're working with our carbon team on how do we deliver a solution, or how do we go about that challenge in a way that's really beneficial from a nature perspective, but also delivering on that climate adaptation risk.
Fantastic. I think it's such an interesting opportunity in the infrastructure space to be looking to nature-based solutions in a climate adaptation lens and thinking about avoided costs in future, reduced management expenses. So there's a lot of interesting opportunity there. PK, I wonder if that resonates just from a land management perspective for you.
Yes, absolutely. I think to me that it's interesting because the questions they can feel a little bit like where it's quite linear, whereas in reality, it isn't. This happens and then this action is taken. You're sort of having to think about these things on multiple fronts. And so to me, the process and approach of just even approaching it in this TNFD style it's a cumulative amplifier of looking at it. So we were already thinking about sort of climate governance and framework, but all of that is being now sort of strengthened and solidified as a result of this work. And you can see there being a sort of a mutual benefit to doing both. But it is becoming easier for it to be a more central discussion rather than something that is sort of another program on the side. It's starting to become part of the fabric of the discussion, which is powerful. Yeah, it's important.
Absolutely. And Charlotte, I'll come to you. Does that resonate with your experience? Has it sort of made those types of decisions easier?
Yeah, I think it's funny, isn't it? I think the other guys have said the same, that every time one of you says something, I'm like, oh, I was going to say that. Yeah, I mean, the climate adaptation stuff's really like there for us in terms of flooding, flood alleviation, and like kind of even cooling in towns and things like that we're working in partnership on. So I think it's really easy to forget that what we're talking about is just the world around us. Like, you put a name on it, you say nature, you say the environment, you know, it's the stuff that we survive in every day. So I think I've been to so many conferences and things about stuff like this where I'm trying to get like the nugget of what should I do differently, and a lot of people just ramble on about how amazing nature is, which is great, and it's lovely that everyone's so passionate, but I think like it's important to get the balance of this is it's big, it's not linear, like PA says, it's everything, and like the little nuggets of information that we can give, like Nick did on the climate adaptation stuff, brings it to life. Like, it's integral to everything that we do and the decisions that we make. So I think yeah, I mean, in our business, climate, nature were always interlinked. It's like the governance stuff in TNFD requirements is already the stuff we do because it's the same as TCFD. It's how we manage both. I think I totally understand that there are businesses out there where you might be the environmental eco warrior in your business and you realize you've got this mountain to climb trying to explain to people why they should care. But I think it's just trying to break it down into those things that make it relevant to you as a business, whether it's how you travel to work, whether it's how many trees are in your garden outside the office, or the food that you buy, or where you're sourcing things from. And so I think it's just kind of like trying to break it down a little bit, and that's how it is so interlinked from like every element. You just might have missed it because you're not taking it for granted, but you kind of forgotten that it's there. So I think that's my biggest thing, is that just try and step back, break it apart a bit, and recognize that these things are connected. It's just the planet we live on. It's not complicated. It's just trying to make it relevant to your business.
And we have such better tools to make it more concrete and sort of tangible today. Brilliant. Well, let me start by thanking all of you so much for your time. This has been a great discussion, and I hope everyone on the webinar has found it helpful to have a little bit of a look under the hood of how these pieces of work have developed for each of these different organizations and in such different sectors. I think we'll post a couple links in the chat, which will hopefully be helpful for you. If you haven't signed up to the UK Consultation Group or the TNFD Forum, we really highly recommend it. It's a place to stay up to date with these kinds of events, webinars, where there are consultations underway through TNFD or emerging guidance that's been published. And we've posted a couple different resources that also just talk about how particularly the UK market is getting started with implementing TNFD recommendations. So if you're looking for resources on things like how to bring this to your board and have those initial tough conversations, you'll find them all there. But that's all for today, and we'll be reshaping these quarterly webinars in the new year to take a bit more of a sector focus. So please keep an eye out for those. We'll send some comms around that shortly. But now, again, thank you so much to all of our panelists. We really appreciate your time, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thanks so much, Valerie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.